This is the second video in my How to Write a Horror Story series, and in the last video we sort of established a few guidelines, a little bit of a sort of general approach, and we concluded saying that the most important thing was for you to write what affects you. Don't write specifically for an audience. Don't write thinking what will the reader feel. Think what will you feel. In fact, don't even think it, just what is your reaction to what you're writing as you imagine the story unfold in front of you. If you want it to be frightening, then it should scare you to a degree. If you want it to be funny, it should make you laugh, and hopefully you'll find that same reaction in a reader. So I'll link to that down below. That's the first video. In this video we're going to be talking about now moving forward and just starting a story, just getting to work on a horror story. But a lot of this stuff will apply to short story writing in general, and maybe writing in general as well. So what we're first going to talk about is the blank page. That's a really pretentious thing. The blank page is a terribly intimidating thing. But you know, it kind of is. The idea of writing something, especially if you're going to write something that's maybe 4,000 to 5,000 words, or even longer if you're going to do a novella or a novel, you can have tens of thousands of words to put down, and the idea of just starting that can be a bit daunting. And even if you know the plot in your head completely, still something that can put you off. So I think the best thing to do is find somewhere that you're comfortable writing, whether you're using a pad and pen or you're using a laptop or your desktop. Just find somewhere that's comfortable for you, that you're going to have as few distractions as possible. But I know that's difficult when you've got a computer there. Believe me, I'm on YouTube all the time. It's ridiculous. So you want to find somewhere that you're comfortable writing. And then what I would say is give yourself a word goal for the day, which is to say, not that you won't write any more than that, but that's your threshold. It's like, this is the minimum that I'm going to write today. And if you're starting off, if you're not used to writing, then just give yourself something small to do. Is just say, right, I'm going to write 100 words. That's about a paragraph. And then if that's your goal for the day, it doesn't seem so daunting as writing something that's much bigger. You're just sort of chipping away at it. If you write a creepypasta, for example, a short one that's sort of microfiction, around about 500 words, 5 days you'll have it done, at least your first draft. And if you want to go further than that, then that's great. For me, I try to say write 500 words. That's my threshold. And then I try to reach 2,000, but if I at least get 500 done, I know I've significantly impacted whatever it is that I'm working on. Round about the 500 word mark, I know whether I'm going to be really in the zone for the day. If I get to 500 words and I'm just not really feeling it, if I've not really get into it, then I'll maybe stop and do something else. But most of the time, by the time you get to 500 words, and for you, if you get to 100 words, you'll actually want to just keep on going. Remember, don't be impatient. You don't have to write the entire thing in one sitting. I used to do that. Like, every short story had to be written in the one sitting. I would take an entire day to finish a short story. It doesn't have to be like that. In fact, it's best not to be like that. And you really should give yourself some time between your first and second drafts, but I'll get to that in a future video. So find somewhere comfortable, give yourself an easily attainable goal, something that's not going to put you off from writing. That's the best way to start. So now we move on to actually starting. Now I'm going to talk about a couple of ways that you can go about developing a story. The most complex one, the most complicated one, some people will go for this. Again, like I said in the previous video, it's all about what works for you, not necessarily what works for me or what works for another writer. There are loads of different approaches, and you have to try different ones and see what works best for you. Sometimes it'll be an amalgamation of different aspects of different approaches. So the first thing that you might want to try is writing out the entire plot. And really doing what's known as a treatment. Now, for a screenplay writer, that means that they write a few pages out of what's going to happen in the screenplay or in the script, and then they write the script based on that. For a short story writer or a novel writer or novella writer, it's going to be exactly the same thing. You're essentially writing something which isn't really there to entertain anyone. Although I know some people are going to say that script treatments are often used to sell scripts before people actually see a script in the first place. But in this case, when we're talking about short stories, it's not going to be anything that someone else is really going to see unless you're collaborating with someone. You are going to go from A to B to C to D. You know the alphabet. You're going to go from one point to the next. So you're going to say this character starts here, then moves on to this scene. This is what happens. Then another event takes place. That's what you're going to do. So you're really outlining the entire thread of the story in prose which are not really well written. They don't need to be well written at all. They're matter of factly just describing exactly what is happening. You imagine someone watching a film and someone just describing what is taking place without you actually experiencing the enjoyment of the full film. That's kind of what it's like. Now with this approach, after you've done that, you would then start to write the full story, and in that case you would begin to worry about the words that you use, the sentence structure, the pacing. You might think about subtext, you might think about putting in different things with your language, putting a bit of colour in there, and I sound like a hairdresser, putting a little bit of colour. So at that point you're writing the full story. This is a very complex way to do it, and it is, in fact, even though it's the most complicated way to do it, it's often the one which most people begin with because they find it easier to know exactly where it's going. Part of the joy of writing, in my opinion, is these ideas coming up as you're writing, as you're going, and things can spontaneously happen. Now, some writers will say to you, don't go for the outline approach because you're limiting yourself in terms of how organic the story can be as you're writing, but you're not really, because you can change it as you're going along. Something else might jump in to your mind, but this is the first approach that a lot of people take. It's not the one that I personally take, but it might work for you. If you are going to use this approach, I would recommend using bullet points rather than just writing in a more sort of orthodox way. Just have bullet points of A to B, going down a list. Basically, it would be similar to if you're a director and you had like a short list. You're just going from one thing to the next, and it's a really quick way of getting your ideas down on paper to then move on to the meat and potatoes of writing the full story. What the hell am I talking about? The next two approaches that I'm going to talk about are brilliantly explored in Stephen King's book on writing. I definitely recommend that if you're thinking about seriously getting into writing. But I'm going to give you the sort of gist. So one of the approaches he talks about is using a situation or an interesting event. So you're not really thinking about character, you're not thinking about what's really truly going on, you're not thinking of the ebb and flow of the plot, you're not charting everything out in your head, you're just starting with something interesting. Now what does that mean? Well, if you're going to be writing horror, that probably means having something that's going to make your skin crawl or make you feel frightened, or just the concept, the idea of it being something that is maybe unpleasant in a way. So for example, you might have an idea like someone waking up buried alive inside a coffin. Okay, that's something that's been done a million times over, but let's just run with that for now. You might have that's the initial idea. That's the interesting event. Now that doesn't explain how he got there or how she got there, who they are, why are they there? Are things really the way they seem? Is that person actually in a coffin to start with? You've got all these things that you can explore. You're starting off with something that is interesting because it's a little bit out of the ordinary. And as a horror writer, you're looking for something that is either suspenseful, which would mean that they're in a situation that hasn't been resolved yet. So is that a suspenseful idea? Well, yes, because they would be running out of oxygen. Where's that going to go? How are they going to get out? Are they going to get out? So that's a suspenseful idea that you haven't resolved yet, and who knows, you might decide not to resolve it within the story. As well as trying to create a suspenseful situation, you might want to try something which is more horrific, more explicit. You might have something where, for example, if you're into gore and things like that, someone's been horribly mutilated in a situation, or someone's trapped under a train, or a lot of people being trapped in these stories. So you might want to come up with something that is more of a horrific situation. Someone waking up, being out of a drugged stupor to find that they're being tortured, and then again you're explaining how they got there, who are they. You can explore these things afterwards, but you can go for something that's more explicit like that and then build the story around it. You could also do something that's perhaps more traumatic or shocking, for example, the death of a child. So you've got suspense, sort of true horror and gore. You've got sort of trauma and shock. Did I already say that? So you've got these things, as long as you're building it's like an interesting idea. And here's the thing, if you're starting off with an interesting idea and you've got to say it yourself about a situation, does that interest me? Do I want to know what happens? If that's the case, then you're onto something. You're absolutely onto something. So you might have a lot of different ideas, but I would say, like, don't start writing until you get something and you're like, yeah, I would like to read about that. I would like to know more about that situation, and then you can start building around it. How you do that is entirely up to you. That interesting event, that situation, might be at the start of the story. You might jump into it straight away, or you might be like, I want to lead up to that. That's the end of the story, or maybe it takes place in the middle. You will come to an understanding that as you write, these things just sort of naturally spill out of you, and you will piece it together. You put it together. Some people don't write short stories from the beginning. Some people will maybe just start writing that scene, for example, and then we can trace the way back. I found certainly that this is probably the approach that I use the most. I mean, stories kind of, you don't have to be rigidly dedicated to one approach, but having a situation, something that spurs off an entire story in my mind is kind of the way that I write most of the time. Not always, but most of the time. And I should also mention that there is something that you can do in terms of horror, which is a little bit more difficult to do, I feel, which, if you're coming up with an interesting situation, is something that is not terrifying, not horrifying, not shocking, but is sort of chilling. It's eerie. It's the best word for it. Something which is subtle. Sometimes those can be the stories that actually play most on you. You can actually, in the end, be the most frightening when you're thinking about them afterwards. They are more difficult to do, so if you are starting out, you might be better trying something a little bit more overt, and the threads of the story will develop out of it a bit easier. But certainly doing something that's creepy as opposed to terrifying is definitely something you should try at least eventually. I need to stop talking with my hands so much. You might be wondering, where does character figure in all of this? And the truth is that it doesn't. You develop your characters as you're writing the story, as you're going along. The other approach that I was talking about is to use character instead of a situation to jump off into a story. Now, a lot of writers do this. Ray Bradbury is one of my favourite writers. He tends to have this idea of characters. I think Stephen King does this as well, where you develop the character first. You have the ideas of these people that you're interested in, that have you feel have something to say, and then you just start writing about them. And they could be in a coffee shop somewhere having a coffee, and they could just be talking to one another, and you will find that things will come out of that. For me personally, I start with situations, but a lot of writers, and some really amazing ones, like I say, Ray Bradbury, Stephen King, they start with their characters and build up from there. They might also have an idea. This is the thing where you can amalgamate the two. You might have great characters and you might be searching for a situation to place them into. A good way to develop these characters, if you're finding you want to try this approach and you're not sure how to really start with it, you can actually write a bio for each of your characters. So let's say in a short story you're not going to have many characters, and in a creepypasta, a lot of the time you're not going to have a lot of characters. Sometimes you'll just have maybe one character, someone telling the story in first person. But so let's say at the most you have 3 characters interacting with one another. And what you do is you say, right, I'm going to write like a 150 word bio for each of these characters. I'm going to write who they are, where they were born, how they were brought up, what their family was like, where they were raised, anything interesting or traumatic that happened to them while they were children or growing up, or different times. What is their situation now? What do they work as? Where do they live now? All of these things. What are their relationships with each other between the different characters? And most importantly, normally for your main character, or for at least the focus of the short story, you want to have a hurdle, so some problem that this character is going to have, that you're going to try to explore and solve. And even more important than that, to get an idea of a character, it's always good to write, what do they want? What do they want out of life? You know, if it's someone if it's a villain, then that's normally the easiest thing, because you can come up with some idea of something that they want, something that's terrible. But you want some sort of issue that they've got, and you know, what is it that they want out of their life or out of the situation that you're putting them in. So those are the 2 main ones that a lot of people go for: situation or character. And those are just a few ideas how you can jump off into a story. There is also the approach that creative writing classes often take, which is that they'll give you an object or a prop, a character name, perhaps a line of dialogue, maybe even the title of a short story, and you have to weave these together into a story. And that can help kick the brain into thinking about stories and thinking about piecing these things together. So that can give you a jumping off point as well. And you will find a lot of these suggestions, loads of websites online for creative writing. You don't necessarily have to go to a class to do these. I'll try and leave a couple of links down below to some of these websites where they have challenges, daily challenges and things like that. So they'll give you an object, say, right, you need to write a 500 word short story with this object in it. These are good things to get your brain starting to think about stories. And that's the thing. That's the thing that's amazing, is that once you start getting into writing, often your brain just starts picking up things as stories. You start to see an interaction between people that you know, or something take place, and you think, I can write about that. I can build a story out of that. So that's that. Once you start to get into that groove of doing that, you'll find that you'll be trying to avoid stories. You know, most of the time, just be thinking of these things all the time. So that's all I really wanted to say about starting off and starting writing. The most important thing is just get your word count goal and just go for it one day, wherever you are. Just find somewhere that you feel comfortable writing, and whether you use character or use situation, whatever it is that you're doing, whether you plot the whole thing out, just go for it. Just start writing. If you just get 100 words done, then that's great. You've still got 100 words towards actually finishing something. And that is another thing as well. You need to try and make sure that you complete as much as you can and finish as much as you can, but I'll talk about that more in a future video. So I'll be back soon with another video. As always, please check out my Facebook page down below, and I'll leave a link to my stories as well. And I hope you have a good weekend, unless it's during the week when you're watching this, in which case have a good week. And next time, hopefully I'll be a little bit more concise and less as and as, because I am really tired. So good night.